Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Diseases, parasites, extreme weather, and more of our continued coverage on the wars in the Middle East are all part of the news this week, but first, let's go shopping. Or maybe not. Well, it's that time of the year again when millions of shoppers kick off the holiday season, or should we say kick each other. Black Friday drew plenty of shoppers to the stores, but with all those gifts and no self-control, fights broke out across the United States. Now, police had to respond to numerous calls at Walmart stores and other shopping centers as the shoppers in the holiday spirit pushed, shoved, slapped, and wrestled one another to get the best bargain.
Wow. Overall, holiday sales are forecast to reach an all-time high of $630 billion. $93 billion of that will be spent online. Now, current statistics show spending is up 13% from 2014.
Well, from fighting in the stores to fights in the lab, doctors have been trying to kill certain bacteria for years, but are losing the battle. Now, superbugs, those that can't be treated using 2 or more antibiotic drugs, are becoming resistant to the last line of defense, the last drug. Now, the consequences of such bacteria becoming resistant to all antibiotics might be catastrophic.
I bet you. Now, colistin is the drug that has been used as a last resort when other treatments for common infections have failed. However, this too is becoming ineffective. Doctors and scientists are very worried about this resistance, but are even more worried about the mechanism of the resistance. In other words, how the bacteria is able to resist, because that ability of resistance can be spread very easily between species, which means global spread is likely.
Wow, scary.
Yeah.
Well, a recent study published in the journal Lancet Infectious Diseases highlights the concerns of the overuse of antibiotics. David Plunkett at the Center for Science in the Public Interest calls the new report out really frightening. You're looking at the last line of defense against antibiotic resistance falling. He says you're looking at the potential for untreatable epidemics.
Public health officials feel this is a major wake-up call and have been warning about the impending post-antibiotic era for years. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that annually 2 million Americans are infected with bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, and more than 20,000 die from those infections.
Despite the antibiotic colistin being such a powerful one, people who contract these untreatable infections will begin to die. Now, as a side note, 7% of gonorrhea cases in Toronto, Canada are now untreatable. But this Catan is happening, not just in Canada, but in countries across the world. So it's not just an isolated strain, but rather one of many that illustrate we have to take action now.
Yeah. Well, superbugs aren't the only things or bugs scaring people these days. The kissing bugs are making their way to Alabama and Georgia, and the results may be deadly. While Auburn University experts say families in the area should be aware, they also say there is no need for alarm.
Well, the kissing bugs get their name because they like to bite people on their mouths and around their eyes. Now, the reason for this behavior is that they are drawn to carbon dioxide that we breathe out. The problem is the bug's feces can be deadly if you rub it in your nose or in your eyes. Now, it can also cause terrible inflamed red sores and a disease known as Chagas.
The actual cause of the disease is a parasite which is carried by the kissing bug and expelled through its feces. Once the feces is rubbed into the bite or other opening, the parasite enters the body and could lead to sickness or death 10 to 30 years later. Yeah.
According to the World Health Organization, chronic symptoms caused by the parasite include digestive problems, such as an enlarged esophagus or an enlarged colon in 10% of the cases. Now, 30% of the cases lead to heart failure because the parasite chews through the cardiac muscle. Now, it's estimated that 6 to 7 million people are infected globally by the parasite.
Well, from one bug to the next, Jennifer Sain's daughter, a sophomore at Clover High School in South Carolina, got a big surprise when she looked at her friend's plate of food during lunch. Laying in the pile of rice was what appeared to be a worm. Ooh. Yeah, a worm. That's right. In disbelief, the two girls showed the rice to the lunch lady, who dismissed their concern that the worm was in the food, telling them that it was just a piece of rice that didn't puff when it cooked.
Well, you can decide for yourself, but Mrs. Sain was concerned, thinking the object was definitely either a maggot or a mealworm. Now, Sain reported the incident to the local health department, who contacted the school. According to WCNC, the Clover School District confirmed that it has notified the food vendor responsible for providing the rice and also removed that order of rice from all of its other schools.
Wow. Well, the health and safety of our students is our highest priority, the school district said in a press release. We take this incident very seriously and are conducting a thorough supplier investigation with our quality assurance team.
Well, are we raising a generation of diluted narcissists? The American Freshman Survey has been accumulating data from 9 million college freshmen for 47 years. Its findings reveal that college students are more likely than ever to call themselves gifted and driven to succeed, even though their test scores and time spent studying are decreasing.
Wow. Dr. Keith Abloh of the Fox News Medical A-Team agrees with the study's finding. He said, "It rings true with what I've experienced treating young people, some of whom thankfully want to get closer to their real feelings and their capacity for empathy, but many of whom struggle to do that."
Dr. Abloh says the reason for this narcissistic attitude has to do with social media, among other things, stating because they face social media and reality TV and technology that tells them that they are stars on Twitter, worthy of followers, that they ought to have 1,000 friends on Facebook, and be able to delete unwanted feedback and block people who don't like them. So they're developing this complex.
This superiority-like complex. Well, the problem is worsened by everyone around them, he says. We are truly raising a generation of narcissists because what we're doing is reinforcing the notion that they ought to think of themselves as incredibly special and beyond reproach, beyond doing any wrong. That's right.
Well, an ironic tragedy unfolded in Colorado Springs this week. A man walked into a Planned Parenthood clinic where abortions are performed and began shooting. Now, after the standoff ended hours later, 3 people had died, including 1 police officer. 9 more were taken to the hospital, 4 civilians, and 5 officers, all said to be in good condition.
According to reports, the gunman stormed the clinic and began shooting, then exchanged gunfire with the police. The 911 call came in just before noon, and it was a long afternoon for police, who had to place surrounding buildings on lockdown and evacuate as many people as they could from the area. At a nearby shopping center, people were told to shelter in place as the police searched for the suspect, and in the end, the man surrendered himself to the authorities.
Well, more severe weather across the United States. This time, a band of storms stretching from the southwest to the northeast, dumping snow, ice, and rain as it moved east. Flooding in Texas killed at least 4 people. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area alone, they received 6 inches of rain, prompting rescues. Now, firefighters responded to 911 calls in the suburb of Garland. However, not all were able to make it in time to save the callers.
That's right. That same weather system dumped snow across most of the nation's midsection from Colorado all the way to Iowa. And Kansas saw treacherous driving conditions as it was hit with a mix of ice and snow. And conditions are expected to worsen into the weekend. In parts of the southern plains, as the weather pattern continues, the Texas Panhandle may see up to an inch of accumulating ice on the roads, making it very, very dangerous for driving.
Well, with the murder death toll in Chicago this year already reaching 438 and outraged protesters taking to the streets almost habitually now, there are calls for calm following the newly released video showing the shooting of an African-American teenager by a white police officer.
That's right. While the fatal shooting took place 13 months ago, the officer involved was just charged with the crime earlier this week. Footage of the shooting had already been released, but 2 more dash cam videos which show the October 24th incident just emerged. While neither sheds much more light on the shooting, they do offer a different angle. 17-year-old Laquan McDonald is seen walking away from police, then shot 16 times in 15 seconds. While he lies on the ground dying, you can see the officers just standing around.
As you can imagine, Katan, the released videos here sent protesters back into the streets once again. Yeah. Now, they even linked armed to block shoppers from entering stores during the Black Friday event. Now, both the city of Chicago and McDonald's relatives calling for calm, but the frustration over it taking more than 400 days to charge the officer is outweighing their calls for the calm.
Interesting. Well, the cycle of retaliation and hate isn't just a local phenomenon. However, the French launched airstrikes this week in Syria in response to recent terror attacks. As other heads of state observed and offered commentary, Larry McGee has our coverage on these latest turn of events. Larry, what do you have for us?
France carried out air assaults in Roca this week, the location which ISIS insurgents identify as the capital of their caliphate. The French are said to have selected their targets based on U.S. information, which was not made available to them prior to the recent strikes against Paris. They are said to have been military targets, such as a training camp and command center, which America is believed to have had pegged to eventually bomb itself. Analysts say this is a show of force for the former home of the Avignon papacy, in a statement that it intends to retaliate and fight back, striking further targets such as civilian infrastructure, which was once considered off limits. Up until this point, such strikes were reserved for oil facilities reported to be utilized by ISIS to generate over $1 million per day in black market oil sales. According to U.S. reports, those efforts were insufficient to produce anything outside of that which could be repaired in a day. But 2 weeks ago, the U.S. began another bombing campaign, which is purposed to disrupt the insurgent group's oil operations for 6 months to a year. To this extent, U.S. A-10s and AC-130s, gunships that is, demolished over 100 tanker trucks in Syria, and Russia is reportedly poised to ramp up its bombing efforts as well. In communicating the Britain position, Prime Minister David Cameron had this to say.
ISIL have attacked Ankara, Beirut, and of course Paris, as well as the likely blowing up of a Russian plane with 224 people on board. They've already taken the lives of British hostages and inspired the worst terrorist attack against British people since 7/7 on the beaches of Tunisia. And crucially, they have repeatedly tried to attack us right here in Britain. So I'm in no doubt that it is in our national interest for action to be taken to stop them. And stopping them means taking action in Syria, because it is Raqqa that is their headquarters.
In echoing the same sentiment of urgency and fear, the French head, François Hollande, says the French are in a state of war against terrorism. The French president says the war is against ISIS militants. It has an army, financial resources, and oil. It has territory and accomplices in Europe and in France with young radicalized people it wants to kill and has killed here. In speaking on the Syrian crisis, Russian President Vladimir Putin, in his dialogue at the New World Order, New Rules or No Rules Summit, posed the question, of who armed the Syrians that were fighting with Assad. He went on to ask who created the necessary political and informational climate that facilitated this situation, who pushed for the delivery of arms to the area. To the attentive crowd of leaders and journalists, the Russian leader inquired, "Do you really not understand as to who is fighting in Syria? They are mercenaries, mostly. Do you understand? They are paid. Mercenaries fight for whichever side pays more. They arm them and pay them a certain amount. So they fight. They have arms. You can't get them to return the arms," he says, of course. And at the end, they then discover that elsewhere pays a little more. So they go there and fight. Then, Mr. Putin says, they occupy the oil fields, wherever in Iraq and Syria. They start extracting oil, and this oil is purchased by someone. Where are the sanctions on the parties purchasing this oil, he asked, and questioned further, do you believe the U.S. does not know who is buying it? Is it not their allies that are buying oil from ISIS? Do you not think the U.S. has the power to influence their allies, or is the point that they indeed do not wish to influence them? Then why bomb ISIS, he posed, in areas where they started extracting oil and paying mercenaries more? In those areas, the rebels from civilized Syrian opposition forces immediately joined ISIS because they paid more. The Russian leader says that he considers that absolutely unprofessional politics. In support of the notion that America is somehow complicit with ISIS, the president is being accused of having made one of the biggest Freudian slips in recent history. Listen closely to the president's following comments concerning ISIS, after which we'll return to Katan and Jeff.
It's moving too slowly, but the fall of Ramadi has galvanized the Iraqi government. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. Speeding up training of ISIL forces.
Well, Katan, regardless of who's responsible for it, war has never brought peace.
And it never will.
Well, according to a statement by RT, ISIL's origins are the result of the illegal 2003 invasion and occupation of Iraq. Now, at the same time, Russia has been invited by Damascus to fight and destroy terrorism in Syria. Terrorists who have a death cult ideology, who view that the end of the world will come fighting the armies of Rome, that being Western countries, fighting them in northern Syria.
Interesting, armies of Rome. According to a report from Press TV, President Obama is turning up the anti-Syria rhetoric, saying that the crisis in Syria will not be resolved as long as the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is still in office.
President Assad, on the other hand, is saying that terrorists have managed to capture a number of regions in Syria because they're being supported by certain foreign countries.
That's right. In an interview with China's Phoenix TV, President Assad said that all kind of support to the ISIL forces passed through the region of Turkey with the coordination of Saudi Arabia, and that such assistance is being overlooked by the U.S. and other countries.
He also slammed the U.S. coalition for its failure to contain the terrorists and added that the U.S.-led campaign in Syria has yielded no results other than helping the terrorists to gain more ground and recruit more members from around the world. Yet he hailed Russia's military involvement, saying that since the Russian campaign, terrorists have begun to retreat and flee in thousands.
Interesting. Regarding that Russian campaign, they have recently stepped up their airstrikes in Syria against ISIL by striking at the transport of oil tankers. That is the main support of financial income for ISIL. The Russian General Staff has said that they struck 500 oil tanker trucks transporting oil from Syria to refineries in Iraq, and this move has slowed their capabilities to export illegal oil.
The ISIL militants were generating revenue from the oil contraband and was the single biggest source of money for the group. Now, at the recent G20 summit, President Putin said that ISIL is receiving funding from 40 different countries who buy oil from militants, including G20 members.
Ooh, wow. President Putin also revealed satellite images showing tanker trucks transporting oil stretching dozens of kilometers, which Moscow has dubbed the Islamic State's pipeline on wheels. Well, shortly after those comments from Putin, the U.S. struck a convoy of 116 ISIL trucks in Syria, which some say that they, being the U.S., appear to have done, being shamed into doing so with Russia's attacks.
The reasons for those speculations is because this is the first time they have targeted Islamic State trucks transporting oil since they began airstrikes against the group more than 1 year ago. Now, estimates of revenue generated by ISIL militants from illegal oil sales are estimated at over $500 million annually.
Wow. Well, the conflict doesn't stop there. A Russian fighter jet was shot down by a Turkish military, and the fears are that these actions could draw NATO allies into a conflict with Russia. Since Russia began operating airstrikes from a military base in Syria, analysts say that it was an incident or accident that is waiting to happen.
Russian airplanes violated Turkish airspace on 2 previous occasions, as well as flying within 500 feet of U.S. fighter jets striking targets in Syria, as well as bombed opposition groups supported by the U.S. and its allies. Now, to prevent accidents, a hotline was set up between Russian military and the U.S. military engaging in airstrikes to prevent incidents, but that too was to no avail.
Interesting. As a result, Russia sent a military cruiser to be stationed off the Syrian coast, ready to shoot down any planes that threaten its aircraft. U.S. President Obama encouraged both parties to remain calm and said that the shot-down plane was a consequence of Russia fighting in support of the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad.
Obama also said that this comes as a result of Russia operating very close to a Turkish border and going after moderate opposition. Now, Turkey is a NATO member who's been deploying jets and troops to try to conquer what appears to be even more aggressive actions by Russia.
Well, the sudden appearance of Russian forces created another threat to NATO, this time on their southern flank, when the U.S. sent air supports to combat ISIS forces in that area. Of course, that also included support to protect Turkish airspace against Russian warplanes.
Now, Moscow has described Turkey's actions as a planned provocation and has threatened economic retaliation against Turkey and accuses Turkey of supporting ISIL terrorists. Now, Turkey has rejected those accusations.
Russia is Turkey's second largest trade partner and, as we said, is considering retaliatory economic measures as a result. Now, Prime Minister Medvedev said measures include banning imports and halting joint economic projects like suspension of a planned pipeline project, which would allow Russia to export gas to the EU through Turkey.
The country's tourist board has suspended all tours to Turkey, a move that is estimated to cost the Turkish government an estimated $10 billion. But sanctions aren't all. There's also been a war of words between the two leaders. Now, Russian president said that ISIL forces are transporting oil into Turkey every day.
That's right. Putin said the amount of oil that is transported into Turkey is on an industrial scale and comes from terrorist-held areas rather than other places. Our jets have witnessed this from the sky, and these fuel tankers have been entering Turkey day and night. The UN Security Council has a special resolution that bans oil purchases from terrorist groups because it is said that those barrels are not only filled with oil, but blood of the residents from countries like us, Putin concluded.
He also added that terrorists would spend the money to buy weapons and ammunition that will cause more bloodshed, and if the Turkish government is not informed of the issue, there could be corruption and collaboration involved. Now, Turkish President Erdogan lashed out at those accusations and accusing his country of buying oil from terrorist ISIL.
Yeah. He said that the suppliers of oil and natural gas to Turkey are apparent. Our biggest supplier is Russia. Erdogan said, there are those who are claiming that we are buying oil from ISIL, and of course those claims are unacceptable and they will have to prove it.
President Putin also commented on the tragedy of a commercial Russian airliner that took the lives of all passengers on board. He said, most often without any apparent reasons, external or domestic, just like it happened with the bombing at the end of 2013 at a train station in the city of Volgograd. We have not forgotten anything or anyone.
The killing of our citizens over the Sinai Peninsula was one of the deadliest, and the tears, he said, will forever remain in our hearts and minds. But it will not prevent us from finding and prosecuting the criminals behind this terrorist attack.
The Turkish president at a recent conference said, yes, it's playing with fire to attack the Syrian opposition, which has international legitimacy under the pretext of fighting against Daesh. Now, the whole world admits Turkey is right in this incident, so it's playing with fire to use this incident as an excuse to make unacceptable accusations against us.
And go as far as he continued mistreating our citizens who have gone to Russia to participate in a trade fair, irresponsibly striking trucks which are in the region for commercial activities or humanitarian aid is playing with fire. We sincerely recommend Russia not play with fire.
Wow, sounds like fighting words.
They sure do.
Well, we finalize this broadcast with an interview between Meet the Press and Governor Jeb Bush regarding war against ISIS and the France attacks. Now, Governor Bush was asked, how do you defeat an ideology? He responded, you take it to them. In Syria and Iraq, you destroy ISIS and build a coalition to replace this radical Islamic terrorist threat to our country and to Europe and replace it.
He continued, as long as ISIS exists, it gains energy and more recruits around the world. He also said regarding the U.S. focusing on getting rid of Assad, and if the U.S. should forget that goal and just, of course, focus on ISIS, the governor responded by saying, I think we need to focus on both and build up the Free Syrian Army. This is viewed as a law enforcement exercise by the Obama administration, and we should declare war, wanting to go all out with this.
As well as harness all the power, he continued, that the U.S. can bring to bear both diplomatic and militarily, of course, to be able to take out ISIS. This is a threat to Western civilization, and we should consider it that way. This threat can be contained, but more importantly, it will never die unless it's destroyed.
He also concluded by saying that we do have a responsibility to help with refugees after proper screening, and I think our focus ought to be on, he said, the Christians, not everyone, but just the Christians who have no place in Syria anymore. Well, if today's broadcast has you thinking this world is a crazy, mixed up mess, well, you'd be right. But where does one go to escape the hatred, confusion, the war, sickness, and death that's surrounding the entire world? Well, there's only one place, and that's the house of Yahweh. Only at the house of Yahweh can you find safety, peace of mind, the way to health and joy, and of course, true love. Yisrael Hawkins has been teaching the way of Yahweh in this wilderness for over 50 years, and the inspired words that he teaches has never failed those who've put their trust in them by putting them to practice in their lives. You don't have to be a victim of a society of hatred. You can start now on the road to true peace. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Now's your opportunity to take that step before it's too late by contacting the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how you can take that first step.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also check out our new website, www.ypnnews.com. And to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And again, don't forget www.yisraelsays.com for the best study tool on the market today.
Now, don't go anywhere. Up next, the inspired words of Yahweh as brought forth by Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.